Once upon a time, there was a community of women who decided that it was time to create legends out of their lives. And how does that work? How does one make a decision to, instead of just living along and responding to everything, actually choose to get an understanding of one's own story to the point where you can create a context of something called legend? I am super delighted to be here today at the Cosmic Cowgirl Studio in our 10th year of forming this legendary community. Right in this very town. And I'm here with Stella Jenafer Joy, and Hazel Grace, and my mom, the poet, Caron McCloud. I wanted to start with a quote by my mom that has been hugely instrumental, at least in my life and my storytelling. We have arrived at our truths by forgetting the parts that we didn't like, making up the parts that were missing, and holding on for dear life to the little we came upon that we could trust. And inherent in that is the sense of choice at how one relates to one's story, particularly the past and the hard things, and then how to then create a future woven into a myth. And these women have been working together over these 10 years, and this one most recently, to bring together a conversation about what is that shift actually between just living your life, understanding you're in a story, and then choosing for it to be a legend. So we called this circle today so that we could have a conversation with each other and share with you really how much this has changed our lives, and also thousands and thousands of women that we've called into circle since we've been having this conversation and teaching our landmark course called Legend, which operates on different themes depending on what we're up to in our life. So we thought we'd start with my mom giving a little bit of an idea of context, because context is a holy word around here. And it is what creates the framework in which a story can be built. And she taught this to me very, very young.
So about creating a context, it's actually choosing a theme in which we want to live our lives. Like Shiloh so often talks about, is that your story? Is that the story that you're telling? Is that the story that you want to be remembered for? Is that the story in which you want to frame your experience of your life? So to keep looking at the stories that we tell, and the stories that we don't tell, and taking responsibility for them, creating a context that's big enough to live a big life, and then living into that context. And what context does is it provides a theme, and it provides a perspective and a way of going about living our lives as a great adventure, and making choices about what we do want that story to be. When people think of us and they say, well, isn't she the one who? Is she the one who's always complaining about her horrible childhood, or whatever it is, my illness as I get older? And we have this joke about the older folks getting together and having an organ recital by what's going on with our bladder and our kidneys. And what is that the story that I want to be known for, or do I want to be known for being the poet? So what it does is define and provide an identity, or the container for our identity in which to occur. Does that?
Yeah.
And so, having grown up within that context, what did that change and shift for you, Shiloh?
Well, from an early, I actually think it's life-saving. I think that living life in the context of legend is life-saving for the child. And I'm happy that Hazel Grace is getting to be raised in this context. Thank you, little one. Because it allows us to be responsible for what we're creating. And it allowed me to relate to my life as a great adventure instead of just letting my life happen to me. And then I get to ask the question, what wants to happen, right? That's one of Jenna and my favorite questions of like, what's ready to be revealed? How about for you?
Well, to segue a little bit into this particular course and myth, one of the really fun things about bringing in a context that includes fairy tales and magical thinking is the way that one can live their life imagining that there is a magical context in everything that you're doing. And so you're driving along and songs come on the radio that have just the right message for you. And you find a symbol beside the side of the road and it has just the information that you need to live your life. So a slightly different context, but a very fun one.
Right, because then there's a framework in which things are occurring for you, and without the context, you may not notice those things.
Yeah.
Right? How about you?
Well, I think when I first heard the term legend, it was too big. It felt too large, right? Until I understood more about the context of that. It is about how I want to show up in my life. You know, do I want world peace? Yes. Am I personally responsible for it if I'm legendary? No, right? And so I was.
You're not.
Oh, jeez, okay.
So disappointed. I was so counting on that.
I'll put it on my agenda for next week. So it's really about learning, leaving your. For me, it's about leaving my own story behind, or when I'm able to. I'm having a pity party or something. I'm able to look at it and go, is that the story you want to be telling yourself? I mean, Jen, I'd be on the phone with her. I mean, I'm looking back to 7-8 years now. She goes, is that the story you want to be telling yourself? Yes, I do. So it is about choice and making and choosing that that's not how I want to see myself, and I don't want to live my life that way.
And I think that those choices also create changes in our body, our heart, and the relationships. Because I think it's interesting to look around at our life and say, who in my life right now is in support of the story I want to tell about myself? And the scary thing is, for a lot of us, we're surrounded by people who want to keep us stuck in our story. And that's one of the reasons why we stay there as long as we do, because other people and systems are sort of enforcing it without even necessarily meaning to, but that's what's familiar for them and to them. And so part of Cosmic Cowgirls is about getting outside of the sort of familiar context of your regular community and family and going, wow, who would I be being if I wasn't limited by those ideas? And I feel like once we're adult, when we're children, we're in cages other people make for us. But once we're adults, we get this opportunity to realize that there's a cage at all of story. And then we hold the key. I wear my magical key today. We hold the key to unlock the door of our own cage and just either stay in or to actually move out and see what wants to be created. And that's something I love about the way that Jenna works in the world through wonder. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Wonder.
That said it all, I think.
that we normally walk through our life having the same thoughts over and over again, and that when you bring the magic key of the word wonder, I wonder, and you start to unlock new terrains, new ideas of how things.
Yeah. And it has your brain work in a different way, which is a lot of what we teach about in this sort of Cosmic Cowgirl technology, so to speak, is how to access a different part of your consciousness so that you can operate from, instead of just the past is part of what's in your medicine basket, but you get to operate from this potential space in the future that doesn't exist yet, that your brain won't go to unless you ask it to.
And that creating space that's totally consistent with the context. It's like we all live within boundaries, whether we recognize it or not. I don't care how much of a free spirit I think I may be. There are some boundaries out there, but if I'm not aware of what they are, if I haven't defined them, if I haven't created my own context, then I can actually my life can be being run by barriers of which I'm not aware. But when I start creating the context and giving definition to it and choosing my own, then you begin creating your own space to happen in.
Right.
And to, and when we get in that place where we just like we can't go on, or this isn't working, or I'm so confused, or I can't handle this, this is too big, the whole, this is a legend I can't possibly deal with, to realize that our context is too small. Basically, what's happening is that my context is too small to support what I need to do next. And so what I have to do is then expand that context and redefine those boundaries. And when we continue to do that, our context gets larger and larger and more inclusive.
And it's also releasing, because our legendary journey is also about releasing what has held us captive and in the cages, as you say, right? And so part of, with Cosmic Cowgirls and our legendary journey, that's almost like the first part of the journey, right? It's just whose stories have we been living into? In order to live that legendary life, what matters to us? What's important to us as opposed to other people's perceptions of us, right? Which is what's wonderful about fairy tales, right? They take you on that journey of what's everybody else's perception.
And Jenna was just talking about how children raised with fairy tales, which have a lot of hoodoo characters in there, actually help children prepare to know that there's going to be stuff on the path. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that we would have a life that is without the witch in the woods, that's without all of these things that happen in our lives, kind of like you were saying, where we need a larger context. We also need a larger story. So these things happen, they change us, and we need a big enough story that we know how to deal with whatever the witch, whatever the
Missing
prince,
The wolf.
the long sleep, the briars, whatever it is. We need a long enough context to be able to take the lesson of that and live into our that piece of our life, live into that happily ever after.
And then they supply the archetypes.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the archetypes is something we're working with a lot in Cosmic Cowgirls because we like to remember them.
You've done so good.
We were bringing up all the bad people in fairy tales, weren't we?
Tell us all about it.
Speaking of legends, Hazel Grace came out into the world during our last legend class. Is that better?
And now here she is in our next legend class.
She's amazing. We're so glad. She's part of Jenna's legend.
That is for sure true.
Jenna painted her into her painting over and over, and here she is contributing to the story.
I've got things to say, and I can't wait until I've got the words to go with them.
It's true.
I love having this whole generational piece here on the couch.
And so when we think about story, what's amazing is that we're all living inside of a story, but when we don't know we are, then we can be dominated by it instead of be the creator of it. And so part of the work is first to identify, I think, the story. And we use fairy tales as archetypes a lot to see what those archetypes are that may be dominating our experience, right? Like, there are so many feminine archetypes, whether it's mother or daughter. There are so many, and at Cosmic Cowgirls, one of the things that we look at is, what if we didn't enter those archetypes in a traditional way? What if instead we broke those apart a little bit and made up our own archetypes?
What would happen?
What would happen? And so that's kind of an inquiry for you to consider is like, are you living inside of an archetypal story of your own? And how much is your past informing that story? And do you feel at all like you are the author of the potential future? Or are you just letting things happen to you? Do you want to speak to the author in the future piece? Our writer?
So when you're looking, it's about choice, right? It's about deciding what is the story that you want to live into. What does that look like? How do you want to show up? What are the values and the priorities that are in your life? Who do you want? Who's keeping you down? Who's lifting you up? What is the environment that you want to live in? What is the context, as we keep talking about? We are the directors of our own movie. We are the authors of our own story, and it takes practice. It's not. This isn't something that just, okay, I'm going to be legendary and I'm going to live into.
No, it's constant,
It's
right?
constant. It's a continual growth pattern. It's a continual layers after layers that continue to be revealed to us. So it's really making that choice and commitment to ourselves and saying, yeah, I'm going to live into my own story. I'm going to be the author of my own story. I'm not going to let any of this
Anyone
stuff.
else define that?
No
And
more.
How did you first come up with a lot of what we do at Cosmic Cowgirls? I feel has been, for me anyways, been informed by Sue Sellers and my mom, Caron McCloud, and the forming of Cosmic Cowgirls as a company was really inspired by the things I learned in my childhood stories. And so, Mom, how did you first come up with this living inside of the context thing?
Well, again, it's about making the choices and then committing to them, with the points that Mary was making about the commitment. And I've always, as long as I can remember, been about the creativity. And so the context that we are really living in and that we're talking about here is the specific contents of intentional creativity. That whatever that we're doing, that yes, the painting, yes, the poetry, yes, the writing, yes, the legendariness, but it's also about just creating a life in which we want to claim and to live into. I think the basic thing for me was wanting to live a life where I felt like I mattered. There's so much that holds us back and keeps us from living fully because we feel like we don't matter. It's like people who are always late that have got to be coming from the position that they don't really matter. The show will go on without me. It doesn't matter if I'm there or not. But to start, so we're not really taking responsibility for the things that we should do, could do, would do, if we mattered. And so once I create a context in which I'm the star, I matter, I need to show up, then I'm going to, by God, show up on time. And I'm going to do the things that are expected of me, although not defined by someone else, but that I bring to that everything that I can possibly bring to it, and that I keep my commitments to living into that legend. So that part of your legend is, I come on time, or I do this, right? So that we're known by it. And again, that's totally connected with the identity. It's identity, identity, identity. What defines us, and to be aware of that, and to be aware of how we're showing up. And when did I decide to do that? A long time ago.
You mattered.
That I mattered. Yeah.
Imagine if we live like that, because I think we have a plague of people feeling like they don't matter.
And we have to recreate that every day, because
Right.
we
It
have
isn't something you just decide and then it's
no,
done.
because
like
we
Mary
all
said.
tend to be a little paranoid. Like we get our feelings hurt and we start making up how people don't really want us or we don't matter, and then we start telling that story to ourselves. And it was also mentioned here early in our conversation about getting accustomed to our sorrows, getting accustomed to the stories. There is a lot of sadness and bad things happening in this world, so much so, and we're so busy, constantly busy, trying to keep up, being under pressure, and that becomes so customary for us, so much a part of who we are, that if we do get a few minutes to sit down and have a cup of tea, we immediately think, I can't really possibly having this time. You know, I must have forgotten to call someone that I was supposed to. Wasn't there an appointment I was supposed to be keeping? We are so unaccustomed to being able to just relax, to matter enough to take care of ourselves, that we just keep playing into that I'm not enough, I couldn't be on time, I must have missed something along the way, or I wouldn't be having this little time with myself. So we have to lay claim to mattering enough to take care of ourselves and to live into beauty and to live into adventure, instead of feeling like we don't deserve it, or we're not good enough, or I just have to stay here and do the dishes.
And that's one of the things that for us that about creativity is about that, because I was talking to Shiloh and Jenna earlier about those traumas, those woundings stay in our body, and wherever they came from, you know, whether or when we were 5 or when we were 15 or when we were whatever age, we tend to respond from that age, so that our body holds it. And when we paint, when we create, when we write, we take that out of our body and we put it into form.
Yeah, beautiful.
Right? Which then helps our transformation much more easily.
And I think that whole fairy tale thing that we work with here, fairy tales, folk tales, myths, and legends, are all story archetypes of looking at human patterns, really, that allow us to see what's happening and then to be at cause for shifting it. And it's working with story in the imaginary realm, like as in a fairy tale, that allows us to get a new perspective. And when we're inventing that ourselves, so we're being inspired by existing fairy tales and stories, then we're looking at our own myths and stories that we've been telling, and then we're looking at what is the myth we want to unfold, like Rumi says, to unfold your own myth, that you get to actually choose that. But when we work with imagination through painting and writing, and like we do here, the chronicles and the conversations, your imagination reveals archetypal patterns for you that your conscious mind doesn't necessarily yield up for you, but through painting and writing, you access this unconscious domain, and you begin to draw from the writing and painting something about the larger context of your life that feels hidden for you unless you're creating. And that's what creativity reveals, is access to the hidden places. And then you see, oh my gosh, here I've been doing this all this time, or being this way about it, and actually there's potentially another way. I remember through a painting process that I had realized that I had a story that the best of my life was behind me. And I was living that way, and it was actually informing every single decision that I made. And my huge shift was to say, one, oh wow, I didn't know that was happening. That's totally dominating. Something as subtle as that, which is pretty huge. And then to say, to not fool myself and saying, well, actually the whole thing is in front of me, because we don't believe that either. And in fairy tales, there's that darkness place and that hidden place on the road. You don't ever just go from it sucks to it's glorious. There's all that in between where life is lived. And so for me, that looked like saying, maybe the best of my life could be in front of me. I don't know. Maybe not, but maybe so. And if that's true, that it's possible, how then would I change how I'm living to live into that? And one of my early fairy tales, in fact, my mom took the Solomon Wolfing Little Mermaid book apart and hung all the little mermaids above my bed. And later in my feminist, I was like kind of pissed off, not at you, but like at the fairy tale, because she walks on knives for love. And then I realized at the same time that I thought the best of my life was behind me, that you bet I walk on knives for love. So instead of it being something that was negative from my feminist perspective, like, well, we shouldn't have to do that, actually, that's who I am. I will do anything for love. I'm insane for love. Like, I will seek it out. I will suffer. I will do whatever I have to do. And that I get to be in charge of my own archetype to realize that's my choice. My feminism, my faith doesn't get to actually define how I get to do that, as if you shouldn't do that because it's bad to like give everything for love. I will give everything for love. So by actually thinking the best of my life was behind me, I wasn't living into I will do anything for love. So then I changed my framework into whatever it takes. So I went from maybe to whatever it takes, and then I started to seek for that in my life, which did indeed come to be. My do anything for love standpoint actually opened the possibility for me to discover my love now. And so it's, we don't know all the hidden layers that are happening, but the framework of the fairy tale gives a context for looking at those really hidden, insidious beliefs that could be dominating everything.
And you're talking about living your life as though it's all behind you instead of ahead of you. Reminds me of my archetypes, which are actually from scripture, which a lot of people do consider fairy tales. To me, they're history, but whatever. They're still the archetypes upon what Shakespeare based all of his characters. And I think of the Sarah, she didn't have her child until she was 90 years old, and she was in a space of thinking that it was all over because she no longer had her moon, and here's this miracle that occurs, and she realized that it was all ahead of her, and she laughed out loud, and I love that. I love when I'm feeling like my life is behind me. I think I hear Sarah's laughter. I'm at the campfire with Sarah, and I hear her laughter when she is told by the angel that she's going to have the baby. And it's just if Sarah could have a baby when she was 90, then I should be able to get through the next week or so.
Well, I think the thing about listening to both of you is it's individual, right? It's for you, that was about bringing up the love of an intimate relationship into your life. For Jenna, was bringing a baby, and you do anything. So it's for each of us to decide what that is for us.
Mm-hmm.
And
right, and not have the fairy tales or archetypes stop us or limit us, but inform.
Yes,
Exactly.
yeah.
Right. And to learn from that and apply it.
And I think about, fairy tales, written fairy tales, and you think about them. Sometimes I think, when you watch or listen to a fairy tale, as an adult, it seems so terrifying, right? And that they're made for young children. And so Disney made a whole different fairy tale. I think he really whitewashed it, and so where it wasn't, it didn't show that dark point where you're talking about the in between the worlds or on the journey that we go on.
Right. Dr. Essie said that they've removed, between Disney or the Grimm fairy tales, that they've removed all the effluvia, that there's lots of snot and poop and sweat and blood and tears, and they removed all the effluvia. And because
Anderson and Grimm.
yeah, and so we are, the Little Red Riding Hood story is much darker than it appears.
Right.
And most of them were much darker than they were interpreted for us. But what we're looking at is also that dark myth, whether that's the witch in the woods or the dark man or the Bluebeard or the man who takes the seal skin from the Selkie woman, whatever they are, they're in there, and they're prefiguring challenges that we're going to have in our life. And so who are we going to be in relationship to those challenges? What's our legend? What's our personal legend that we're going to step out from as we are relating to those things, because we get to create the context. And that's the power of the work here, is calling to the women between worlds. The women who live both in her truth and in her fiction, and to use that to create a fertile future for herself and to enjoy herself in the process.
And because we need to get behind all those stories that we told ourselves, all those, you're not enough, you're not worthwhile, you're too tall, too old, too whatever, right? And so being between the worlds and looking at the story from that perspective allows us to get behind that wall.
And then we are in charge of the veils ourselves. So we just wanted to, this conversation is our cup of tea around here. We never tire of it because we're always getting to new dimensions and also seeing the impact that it has in women's lives when they begin to tell a new possible future, when they choose to be the author of their own future. And that's the work that we do here, and we're so happy to have this opportunity to bring you a little red thread cafe between the worlds with some of the women who make this community possible.
Multi-generational.
Blessings. Thanks for tuning in.